Hey guys, welcome back to Basics with Babish, where we're doing something a little bit more interesting this week, steak. Now there's only one king of steaks in my mind, and that is ribeye. It is fatty, it is flavorful, it's expensive, you don't want to overcook it. So we're gonna take a look at a time-tested method to make sure that you cook your steak reliably and predictably to medium rare, which is the only way to cook your steak. Then we're also gonna take a look at a more economical cut of beef, skirt steak. This is a steak that is packed with fat and flavor, and it's less expensive, and it will blow your mind if you just cook it and slice it correctly. Now let's get down to basics. Alright guys, first let's take a look at skirt steak. It's a relatively inexpensive cut that is packed with fat and flavor, but it just needs to be cut correctly to be tender and delicious. So you can see how the muscle fibers run perpendicular to the length of the steak, so we're going to need to cut across those after we're done cooking the steak. If we cut across them, we get shorter muscle fibers and more tender pieces of beef. And this steak is super rich, so it's going to go well with the pan sauce that we learned how to make last week. Let's start by seasoning generously with kosher salt and freshly ground pepper only on one side of the steak. It's so thin that we only need to season one side. Then we're going to heat about a tablespoon or two of vegetable oil over medium-high heat until smoking, and then lay our steak down in the pan like this to prevent splattering. This is an instance when you're going to want to use stainless steel or cast iron because we want the meat to stick and eventually release, giving us both a golden brown crust and a bunch of beautiful fond in the bottom of the pot. These steaks cook very quickly, so after cooking them once or twice, you're going to get a feel for exactly how long it takes to sear them. But until then, reach for your trusty instant read thermometer. I'm shooting for about 115 degrees because the steak is going to come up about 5 degrees after it's had the chance to rest for about 10 minutes under foil while we make our pan sauce. To see how to make the pan sauce, check out episode 2 of Basics, where we use this beautiful fond to make a red wine and shallot reduction. After we've let our steak rest for 10 minutes, we're going to unwrap the foil and get ready to carve. Now remember, we need to cut perpendicular to these muscle fibers to make sure that this meat is nice and tender. First, for both ease of cutting and ease of eating, let's cut each of these pieces in half, and then on a bias, which basically just means diagonally, we're going to cut through the meat across the muscle fibers. And you can see, despite its thinness, we've got this cooked to a perfect medium rare. So we're going to slice it all up thinly, fan it out on a plate, and then top with our pan sauce. Again, if you want to see how to make this sauce, go check out episode 2 of Basics. Then if you're serving to a crowd, a nice way to garnish is with a few sprigs of fresh herbs, or dispense with the garnishes and dig in like the carnivorous monster you know you are. Now, skirt steak makes for a great weeknight dinner, but what about a special occasion steak? For that, we need a tomahawk ribeye. First, we're going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone by both seasoning the beef and letting it come up to room temperature before cooking. So we're going to press it with salt and pepper on both sides and let rest at room temperature for 30 minutes before we even think about introducing it to any heat. The closer the steak is to room temperature, the more evenly it's going to cook, and the pre-seasoning with salt helps the meat retain moisture down the line. So after about 30 minutes, the salt is going to have been partially absorbed into the meat, and it's going to look like this. And for a cut of beef this thick, we're going to use the reverse-sear method. That is to place the steak on a rack in an oven at 225 degrees for about 45 minutes until it registers 115 degrees internally. It is so thick that when we sear the hell out of it in a ripping hot cast iron skillet, it's not going to raise the temperature past probably 125. So once we get a bit of vegetable oil smoking in a cast iron or stainless steel skillet, we're going to add the steak and sear until completely crusted on one side. Maybe 1.5 to 2 minutes without touching it. Once we've inspected the crust and make sure it's up to spec, we're going to flip it over very, very slowly for dramatic effect. And then once we've flipped it, it's time to start butter basting. So we're going to grab a generous pat of butter, maybe 2 to 3 tablespoons, add it to the pan, along with a peeled clove of garlic and a whole sprig of rosemary. These flavors are going to get infused into the butter as we lift and tip the pan slightly to one side so the butter pools in the corner, and we can scoop it up and spoon it over the top of our steak. We're then going to flip the steak once more, making sure we formed a similarly awesome crust on this side, and continue butter basting for maybe another 90 seconds. It's pretty hard to overcook such a thick steak, but you can do it, so don't push it. Once both sides have been properly seared and butter basted, it's time to sear all the beautifully rendered fat on the side of the steak. Simply hold it on its side like this for maybe 60 seconds until the fat turns golden brown and crisp like this. Now that all surfaces are browned, it's time to rest and carve. Now, since we did the reverse sear method, the muscle fibers are not all tensed up the same way that they would be if we had just straight up grilled this thing, so we don't need to let it rest for as long as we normally would, 10 to 15 minutes. In this case, maybe we rest it for no longer than 5, with the fried garlic and herbs over top. Then remove to a cutting board and run a chef's or carving knife along the side of the bone, removing it from the steak. Hang on to this thing. It's a source of wonderful flavor and it will make amazing beef stock down the line, but for now, it makes for good presentation. You can slice on the bias if you like, but with a large steak like this, I like slicing straight down. It makes for more of a steakhouse-like presentation. A few fresh herbs, make sure all the pieces are fanned out properly, and set the carved fat cap on the side for all the twisted, beautiful minds that want to eat it. And that is how you make a bone-in reverse-seared ribeye, the king of steaks. Join me next week when we'll be making both of these steaks together in the bi-weekly Basics with Babish live stream, and join me the week after when we'll be taking a long, hard look at chicken breasts. Not in a gross way.